about fantasy at large. Fantasy at large, that's right, that's what we're for. It's both on fantasy. Large fantasy, well, epic fantasy, I think is what a lot of people call it. I guess I'll just kind of go down the line here. Yes. Oh, you're fine. Is that better? Sweet. Okay. We'll just kind of see what each of you has to say. Why epic fantasy? Why be involved in the fantasy worlds that you are?
Why epic fantasy? I think for us too, it's a pretty easy answer because we've always seen fantasy as a metaphor for life. And we feel that in telling epic fantasy stories, we're saying something about the human condition, but in metaphor, so it's almost like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Certainly. Now, the downside of epic fantasy, at least in our own, most of your experience, is that epic connotes large. And there's not a day goes by that I don't hear from the artist of the series, why did I design so many characters?
On our part, it's because the Witcher series and fantasy in general, the books, the comic books, they explore topics that are relevant to people, and I think that's why they're important and they're popular. And more fantasy is touching upon modern problems. For example, in our series, you have racism, you have country, you have actually the human condition is the most important thing. Of course, we have dragons, we have dwarves and swords and whatever, but still the things that people do and people generate are the most important things.
When I came to Conan, I'd come from the background of someone who had written books set in real history, like real historical eras, and I was excited to sort of shift into a fictional world because I really felt like the world of Conan was in a lot of ways as rich and as detailed as a historical era. So I sort of wanted to see what I could do if I treated it as such, but obviously with a lot of added perks of flying monkey apes and various things.
It's always awesome to create worlds, as a writer. That's kind of what you're doing, even if you are doing something that's sort of set in the real world. But it's great to sort of conceive an entire mythology, an ecology, different races of people, humanoids, and everything else. And to me, that's the biggest appeal of fantasy, is sort of create your own system. It's a great, I guess all writers and all creators play God to one extent or another, but in fantasy, kind of take it to the extremes, which is good.
It's a good point. It actually leads me to my next question. How did each of you start the world building process?
Well, I let a guy named Robert E. Howard do all the hard work.
Within your own series, though, exactly. We all worked on other projects as well, and bringing in that world building element definitely can be an interesting hurdle for fantasy, especially.
Yeah, it's not all that different, both Brian and I work at Marvel, and that's a very similar sort of universe, the Marvel universe, and it's not really that different to me, the fantasy world, still kind of crazy powers and so forth. But you always start with a kernel of truth, as long as there's human emotion behind everything and people see the characters as real people, you can really do any genre or go anywhere.
I just feel like that's the real trick, is to start off with that thing that's going to allow the reader to access it emotionally or intellectually. Find a point where it crosses over with our own world or the land of time. And once you kind of establish that, then you can sort of build and layer on the more fantastical stuff, and it still has a grounding in something that's real, that matters to the reader. Yeah.
Yes, on our part, Andrzej Sapkowski was the original writer of the books. That was the foundation of the video games as well. They're very enthusiastic people.
It's probably a Marvel fan.
Yeah. Sure. He described many things, but he didn't describe many things as well. So this is when we came in, and the game explores some of the things that were not explored and expands the universe. And the comic book for us is somehow the same. So it's more like when you have the extended universe in Star Wars. This is something that you just make it broader and broader and broader, and you bring new stories that are relevant to each other. And I think that's the thing that excites me the most in terms of the world.
I think we approached ElfQuest in a way that was both similar and different. The similarity is that, as everybody here has said, fantasy is at its best when at its core it has an element of real human, real life truth to it. And of course we wanted ElfQuest to have that element. What the characters go through is what we go through. They're solving the same kind of problems that we have, just in sort of a metaphorical arena. But when the world itself got considered, Wendy didn't want to go in a traditionally magic-based direction. There's something in ElfQuest that we call magic, but it's not the supernatural spell-casting magic sword, drink the magic potion kind of thing. It's sort of pseudoscience. It's science that we may not understand yet because we deal with telekinesis, or we deal with, healing, that kind of thing. But we made the decision that it was going to have that seemingly scientific basis as well as the fantastical elements, which we think people resonate with as well as anything else.
As far as building the world itself, we've always thought of the world of two moons as a metaphor for Earth, and the particular continent on which our lead characters, the Wolf Riders, live is certainly North America, and there's a strong Native American influence in the storytelling as opposed to most fantasy, which has a European, often Celtic origin. Certainly Conan is of the Celtic flavor. I wanted to ask you guys a question. In writing Conan, do you put your heads into how ancient people thought, or do you approach it from a modernistic point of view?
Well, the thing with the Conan world is that it's so clear who, like what groups and what parts of the world Howard's basing off of. And I'm like a real history guy, so it's easy. Like I always sort of try to match it up and apply what I know about the real life
Yeah, it depends. I mean, my first arc, the one that follows Brian, is set in the Sudan, essentially, version of the Nubarian age. So I've been reading a lot of Sudanese and Egyptian folk tales. It's kind of trying to give a rhythm for the talk and just some of the idioms of how people talk. I try not to write in dialect because I always feel like I embarrass myself every time I try that. But trying to get some flavor, sort of foreignness to it, or somehow to differentiate. I mean, because the thing about Conan is he's a guy who left, his windswept homeland, and is always this. He's basically a foreigner wherever he goes. So I guess I'm trying to figure out ways to make him the other.
Definitely a relationship between character and setting.
Yep.
So that perhaps you let the character lead you in the direction of what the story's going to go, or other way around.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real chicken or egg thing. I mean, it depends. Sometimes a story always starts with an idea, right? And sometimes that idea is a character, and sometimes that idea is a plot point, and you turn the plot around the characters, or you turn the characters on the plot. It just kind of depends on which direction you're headed in.
How do you feel epic fantasy has kind of changed over the last few years in the general broad public? I mean, are we still too focused on Lord of the Rings, or are we coming into a new realm? went too open-ended. Good, that was the point, yes.
Yeah. Of course, Lord of the Rings is the 8,000-pound gorilla. I mean, and it is the template against which so many fantasies are measured. But personally, I think, having been interested in fantasy since my early teens, when I got involved with Michael Moorcock's Elric cycle and the Stormbringer series and so forth, and on to present day, I think what I've seen more and more of is what you guys pointed out, that fantasy addresses more current issues now, and in a symbolic way, but issues of racism, of one country dominating another, war, famine, all these things are very, unfortunately, relevant to today. And fantasy puts it in a poetic and a high relief kind of a context where you can really talk about it and bring it to people's attention.
And there's sword fights.
And you can never get away from the word I, can you?
That's true. That's
Well, from a gaming standpoint, what do you?
For us, it's The Lord of the Rings, of course, it was always an inspiration for everybody who knows fantasy. But I think after Tolkien, there were more and more people that actually wanted to take fantasy in a different direction, because what Tolkien did was grand, it was grandeur, and I don't think it could be repeated in that sense. So, for example, in our particular case, the fantasy world is just a facade for something that's happening in the world, because there are grand politics, there are real human emotions that actually have influenced the world. And in terms of our world, it's more greedy, more mature in terms of that, and rather in its core, not so much epic in terms of like Lord of the Rings. Because of course, Geralt is our main character. He shifts the balance, but we only see the world from his perspective. And there are many other peoples that actually influence the balance as well. And you can see that what he's doing it's more relevant to his close ones, and not to the whole world. So I think that's a different direction that's getting more and more traction in terms of fantasy.
Also, it just occurred to me that there is a truism in the world of entertainment that nothing succeeds like success. If you look at science fiction fandom, you can divide history into before Star Wars and after Star Wars. When Star Wars hit in '77, suddenly the whole world felt it was okay to enjoy this type of entertainment. I think a similar statement could be made for the Lord of the Rings film with regard to fantasy. There was before Peter Jackson and post Peter Jackson. Now fantasy has been successful and legitimized, and now it is much more accessible as a metaphor to be used in telling stories that relate to current conditions than it ever was before. So why not go for it?
And actually, you can see that more and more. For example, Game of Thrones is something that is actually somehow it's a different genre, but still it's fantasy. You don't see that many magic or actually.
It's got dragons.
Not so many.
And they're really small.
Sure. But it's the sense is more realistic, and it's more like a history book than a fantasy saga. But still, it is fantasy, and you can feel it all over the place if you read or watch the TV series. And it's really popular because because of the things that were introduced, or maybe to the broader audience in the Game of Thrones, it's getting more and more popular in that particular way.
My Conan guys, what do you think?
My dad is the big Tolkien nut in my family. I never really got into it. No women characters. I think it's really strange. There's some sort of an oppressive maleness about all the Tolkien stuff. Not like testosterone or macho in the typical. But I don't know. I just didn't care for it. I'm much more like. But I also like the pulpier stuff, like the Howard stuff, of course. And the sort of the soap opera game. too. But that's more of the stuff that I really react to.
So social issues, you touched on a bit, Wendy. It's kind of a hot button. And you guys actually led the pack long ago with some interesting stuff in your books that might have been a little controversial, might have been a little PG-13 risque, right? I think that you guys did, might have been a few implicit sex, but here and there, right? More explicit. Yeah.
The infamous orgy scene.
Right, the orgy scene. So all right, that happened. That's awesome.
It's great, by the way.
And so when that happened, we also had a great deal of violence in that story, because that's when the war began. The orgy scene was the party the night before, and then the war started. And so I remember we received in a manila envelope the pages containing the orgy scene torn into confetti by a parent who strongly objected. But they didn't send us the pages of violence, where people are getting their faces ripped off and that sort of thing. Because the violence was fine for the children to see, but the pages of sex, no.
It's very American. So, I mean, as other social issues are being addressed, I mean, how do you kind of go about bringing those in and tackling them? I mean, you guys obviously have done that. I mean, going forward, that's obviously an important element.
It's a fine line for us. Wendy has alluded to it, and we've said it many times, that ElfQuest is to greater or lesser extent autobiographical. And this feeds back to what we said earlier here, that the truest fantasy, the most meaningful fantasy, is that which has elements that you can relate to as a reader. So over the course of 35 years, we have put into ElfQuest those trials and triumphs and struggles and problems that we needed to solve as people, both between ourselves and as us in a wider world. Those have gone into ElfQuest, and what we felt and how we have changed over the years. And the scene you're referring to was the late 1970s, and we were just sort of coming down off the cusp of the sexual revolution. So we were, feeling some storytelling oats there. But if you have followed ElfQuest over 3.5 decades, the focus of our concerns in the world has changed as well. Things like racism, things like getting along with your neighbors, whether they're different races or creatures or not. And we have never thought really that we were attempting to do this, that we were attempting to tell a story that this is going to be important or relevant. It's real to us, and we put that much of us into the stories.
Absolutely. Wow. Paul, how do you push the envelope with?
Actually, I don't think there is, for us, there is an envelope that we didn't push in our games. So because Witcher is mature, and we have sex, we have violence, but it always, those things happen in the world. People have sex, people are violent to each other, and if it's relevant to the story, you should show it. And you should show it in a way that it's meaningful to the storytelling process. So if you have a sex scene, it needs to lead to something, and if it does, then it's okay. If it's just sex for sex, that's not really something that we will actually do in terms of that. So when you talk or write about things that are difficult in terms of culture or is a subject that's not widely discussed, I don't think you actually, as you mentioned, you don't really think about it that way. You just touch upon things that you think are relevant, and you just try to show how it's relevant to the world that you're creating.
Brian, your next art turns up the heat a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that pretty much everything I do has some level of social themes in it. And when I started on this Conan series, I was looking for that, and it became clear. I mean, this is like the story of like Conan's great love of his life, and it was like really clear early on that I mean, what I could really explore is the fact that they're like a mixed race, mixed cultural couple. And I would sort of keep finding ways to like use that to reinforce actions or to put them in bad spots. You know, they each go to each other's, you know, homeland at different times of the run, and they're each sort of discriminated against and have to deal with that. And deal with the fact that they react to different things in different ways and have different beliefs about the afterlife, you know, which can be like this is a couple, and I did treat it as if it was like a, you know, living, breathing, real couple that can cause a lot of trouble at times. So that was how I approached it, and really in this last arc, like Bob said, it's really, I mean, it's so hard to talk about without talking about it. I mean, everything just like really comes to like an extreme head, and sort of like all that entire history of all their ups and downs and dealing with all that kind of stuff, just like kind of like explodes outwards in a giant flaming ball of anguish. Funny.
Thanks, Brian. No, and I mean, my run totally follows on that from what Brian's talking about. I mean, you have to leave Conan as a broken man. You know, I mean, you know, not to do too many spoilers for a story that was published in 1934, but but it's kind of like, you know, it's like the Game of Thrones wed redding. Thank you. That's an original right there. And you know, it's the emotional low point of Conan's life. And so we're definitely, it's how does he get himself out of this, you know, devastated place. And in terms of social issues, the story that follows chronologically from Queen of the Black Coast is a fragment that's commonly called The Snout in the Dark, that is literally about a witch hunt. Conan finds himself in Shambhala, which is this capital of Kush, which is sort of what Sudan is in Conan's world. And there's literally a witch running around creating horrible monsters and cursing people, and people are freaked out. And obviously, a witch hunt, this is a literal witch hunt, you know, like the Crucible or something like that, but that can be applied to any number of social issues or you know, things that we find going on where people are being put in a state of fear so they can be manipulated more easily. And that's, you know, that's what that, you know, arc is going to be about.
And it just occurred to me, again, this is a very inspirational panel, because all of these things are occurring to me. Mostly I'm just kind of dead up here, but another way in which I think we push the envelope in our storytelling is to make sure that we show the consequences of the actions and the choices that the characters make. There's a whole lot of entertainment in which characters do things, but you never see the consequences, and oftentimes it's kind of implied that there are no real consequences. But everything that our characters do is going to lead to something, whether it's the next panel or 30 years later. In Final Quest, we're going to see some consequences of stuff that was laid down in the story, in the original quest. We've known about this all that time, but we don't shy away from showing whether it's a happy consequence or, particularly with regard to violence. You know, you do an act of violence and there are consequences that can be dire or violent themselves, and we want to show that. We don't want to show that responsibility.
So, with that, how often do fantasy tales have endings that just seem inadequate? And secondary to that, how do you give a fantasy tale an ending that it deserves?
Oh, that's the ta-da. That's ta-da. I mean, if you follow the hero's journey, it is a formula that absolutely is infallible. You cannot fail to get to your ta-da. You can follow the hero's journey in extremely inventive and circuitous ways, which I think that's what we've been doing. I mean, just all over the map. But at the core of it all is the hero and the hero's journey, and he goes through the different phases, or she. And you simply cannot fail to get to the inevitable conclusion. And when a conclusion is inevitable, the readers, the audience, feels that thump of That couldn't have happened any other way. I don't like it, or I love it, or oh my God, but it couldn't have happened any other way. And the audience needs to come out of a story transformed. They need to be different people than who they were when they started. And I don't think there's any vehicle better than epic fantasy to take people on a long, long hero's journey and go through that and come out transformed at the end.
Again, for us, it's a kind of a different subject because Witcher is based on, as I mentioned, on a series of books. There are 7 of them, and actually the author Andrzej Sapkowski said that that's the end. But then we picked it up, and we picked it up at that point and created a new storyline that is relevant to Geralt. And the further installment of the game will actually be the final game about Geralt, which has Geralt as the main character. And I really cannot tell anything about that.
Okay, that's fine. That's all right.
I just feel like this Conan story I adapted suits me pretty well because I really love a tragic ending. I'm not so much into like the
Story or
Hollywood style. Well, yeah, I mean it's like it's stupid at this point. How many times I tried to walk around it.
Tragedy is ironically uplifting.
It is. I mean, there's that great Joyce Carol Oates quote where she says that tragedy is the highest form of literature, which I love. Does anybody not know the ending to this Conan story? It's all right. I don't want to do it. So yeah. So y'all know what it was.
Raise their hand.
And I mean, that's kind of naturally how I would end things. I like to end things on a downbeat, kind of a bummer. To me, that's what sort of like, you know, that's the kind of ending that like haunts me and sticks with me over time. And when I ultimately feel like I got the most out of it. Like I'll remember it more than I will like the happy Star Wars ending. You know, everybody's cool ending. So I'm loving this. This is really my kind of story.
The great thing about the best Conan stories is that Conan, partly just because he's the good guy, is the only man remaining standing at the end of it, but that also means that all the good guys and all the bad guys have all been killed, and he's just the only one left, and so it's kind of sad. I mean, more generally, I almost never start writing unless I already know the ending, because then I get screwed every time. You just remind me, I have a story that I literally don't know what the ending is. No, it's a fantasy story. No, I'm obsessed with it. Just sitting here.
All right. Okay. So I guess last question before we open up to our audience here for some fan questions. Who do each of you find as an influence on your writing, and who have you read recently that you would say you find influential?
Gosh, I mean, I try to get great influences everywhere. I mean, I love I've just been reading, I've just finished Flashman for the first time, which is a terrific series of novels by a guy named Fraser, set during the British colonial adventures. This one was set in Afghanistan, and Flashman is just a coward and a scumbag and a gambler and a rake. But he always ends up on top despite everyone's best efforts to destroy him. And it's just hilarious, great stuff.
I read a lot of non-fiction books. Usually it's like has to do with work. But recently, like maybe, I don't know, like six months ago, Marvel Comics put me into a workshop that was run by Howard Chaykin, which it was like a bunch of us writers there, and he just kind of yelled at us for an hour about everything we should be doing and not doing. It's like, I mean, I would have paid thousands of dollars for it. It's like the greatest thing ever. And he recommended the Jack Reacher books by Lee Child, which is like easy to sort of dismiss as airport reading, and it is. But he recommended it for plotting, you know, issues, like ways to plot a story well. And so I read that first one, and then went ahead and read all 27 of them. I don't know how many more. It took me about 6 months. And I mean, I unabashedly love it, even though it's like, you know, the very best of the airport thriller. It's great.
So wait, they're all set in airports?
Good idea.
For me personally, I've just finished up the new Brandon Sanderson novel, and I just got the guy, and it's really amazing. But I think you can find really, really good reads in terms of books and comic books as well in the genre. You just need to stick to the things that you are actually looking for. So if you're looking for a really deep story, I think you can find it almost anywhere.
Well, okay, when you make your living 12 to 16 hours a day writing and drawing comics and you're up against a deadline, the last thing you want to do is read them. You'd rather clean your toilet. Now, that being said, my earliest fantasy influence was Michael Moorcock. When I was a young teenager, I actually formed a correspondence with him following his Elric series, Stormbringer, Stealer of Souls, and the tragedy of it was a very tragic storyline, really opened my mind and my heart, and I was just thrilled by it, and learned a great deal about how to craft a story and lead to that inevitable ending from Michael. And then onward, I mean, you know, not too very long after that, ElfQuest got started, and certainly those influences were brought into ElfQuest and our commitment to an extremely long and convoluted storyline. These days, I don't really do any reading of fantasy. I very much enjoy spiritual literature. I would particularly mention Carolyn Mace, who talks about the archetypes. Very fascinating and very relevant to storytelling.
We try for a very complementary working relationship, and where Wendy is Shakespearean, I'm smart-ass. Where I get my most pleasure and therefore what I can most bring to the working relationship is, like her, I don't go too much to fantasy or science fiction or comics for my recreation because I work there. I don't have to play there too. But you mentioned Lee Child and the richer things. I just discovered that, and I'm like pagan, you know where. I'm loving. Until we passed on, I was a big fan of the Robert B. Parker books, the Spencer and the spin-offs, and I'm a big fan of Preston Child, particularly the Pendergasting. The thing that all of these have in common, there are two things. One, they're just tight. They're really tightly plotted. You start somewhere and you get on the roller coaster ride and you're strapped in. You don't get off that car until the ride is over and you've had a ride. And the other thing which appeals to me greatly is the economy of the writing, particularly the economy of the characters' dialogue. And I think that works a nice balance. Particularly as an editor, I can bring that sensibility to the writing for ElfQuest.
All right, very nice, thanks guys. So we're going to open it up to the audience for questions now. If anybody has any Witcher-specific questions, we do have some giveaways courtesy of CD Projekt Red, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Can I interrupt for
You absolutely
This is
can.
driving me crazy. We have 3 characters
Yes.
for ElfQuest sitting there. I want you
That's no
3
joke.
to stand up and be seen.
We have our beautiful elves.
We have
Very nice.
all of these are from Star Roll and Final Trust, by the way, from somebody's left to somebody's right. Brill, the wave dancer, and
Those ears. Wow.
Krim and Pike. And we're just astounded, and we want to show them off to you.
Questions? You, my
Questions.
friend. Stand and speak loudly.
I have a Witcher question.
Fire what?
Witcher question.
No, Witcher.
Sure, how may I help you?
So just this week I finished the book series, and I was curious with the comic, where in the overall timeline does it fit? Is it based somewhere in the short stories, or is it closer to the game?
The story is based within the saga. So there are spots within the saga that are not accounted for. So Geralt was traveling and several years came by and we don't know what happened there. So actually this is happening when Geralt was traveling and we don't know what he was doing, and we're going to know from now on.
My friend right there. Yes.
It's a Conan the Barbarian question. Is
Sure.
there any confirmed artists after which one?
Speak up just a little louder. Sorry.
Is there going to be any confirmed artists for the series following Brian Richmond?
Brad, have we confirmed your artist yet?
We have not. I've been checking my email constantly. I know there's some people up there, but no one has been. There's some names moving forward, but I can't confirm anything yet.
Is it going to be one artist, or will it be like a rotating?
Unfortunately, I don't know yet.
We would love to have a series artist that stays on. And
Like he
hopefully
said,
we will. Absolutely. But hopefully we'll have an announcement for that within the next month or so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
This is more of a statement from Wendy Richard. I started reading ElfQuest back in the early 80s before I was 10. I just wanted to say thank you because as a person of color, growing up, I consider Lita to be black, but I just had her, the second Captain Marvel with the Jerry Crow thing going on, and Storm. So I wanted to thank you because as an ElfQuest is beautiful, you had a whole village full of these dark elves, and the main love interest is Lita. So this is like going on 30-something years for me, and keep going. I hope it's Final Quest Part 2 is
I just want to say, when it comes to fantasy, what would I do without you? Fantasy is about all color, all shapes, all sizes, all looks. There can be no limitations. What would I do without you?
Questions? Yes.
That's a Conan question. What post-Howard authors do you guys draw any inspiration from, or admire, or like their direction?
Honestly, there's so much Howard stuff. I have not yet gotten to the non-Howard stuff. I mean, I probably will eventually, but I've sort of been, just because it's such a huge amount of material, I kind of have purposely limited myself to Howard is canon, period.
I came in rather cold. I mean, I had read a few Howard books when I was young, but when I was prepping for this series, it's the same thing. I wanted to keep my focus very, very narrow. I definitely didn't want anybody else's work influencing me, whether I even realized it or not. So I was strict about it.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, this is kind of a follow-up to the last question. Going down the panel, you have kind of a spectrum here of The World's Two Moons as Pini's creation originally. The Witcher is based on a series of novels, but those novels are finished before you licensed it as games and the comic books. And then you have the Robert Howard work that you're building on, so you have a spectrum. And it would be great if we had Gail Simone here, because Red Sonja takes it to an even further extreme, because that's a character that doesn't really have an original character. It's more layers and layers of stuff that's built up. How do you feel about your particular level of being chained to what's gone before? Since going down this way, you go from having complete freedom, more or less, of everything that you've started, to
A little less than more.
So I think it's a question that you could go right down that aisle.
Well, very, very simply, since there was no before, everything we've created we're chained willingly to.
But we are chained.
Yes, we are chained.
So that's actually a really interesting and a good question, because we try to be very respectful to the source materials. For us, it's the books, and even Andrzej Sapkowski, who's not heavily involved in the games, told us that he did say a quote that, okay, those guys read the books and understood it. So I think that's the most important thing. So we have this world and we love it. Everybody in the studio just loves the Witcher world, and we try to take it to places that we actually feel is good and relevant to the characters that we have in the books and to the world that we're presenting. So even with the comic books, we had a very good understanding of where we're going to take the story, because we know our world very, very well, and we think that that's something that you can actually see. Because if you tell stories in the world that you understand, all the things come up, you know, and then everyone that's starting from the comic books and then go to the books or the video games, they can feel that it is the same experience. This is the same characters, just a different approach to them, specifically because of the medium that you are actually encountering.
I feel when I was brought in on Conan, I was given a mandate to sort of do something different with it. Like, I was given a lot of freedom, and what I pitched had all that sort of diversions in it. It was all like approved by everyone. So I sort of started that book. I mean, if you know the original book, you know it has a first act and a third act, but no second act. And the bulk of my 25 issues happens in that undefined, untold second act of the story, where I had like almost total freedom. I mean, I knew what ending I had to aim for, but aside from that, it was like creating like original material. So I sort of had the best of both worlds. The beginning part was a pretty direct adaptation of the original, which is sort of. I mean, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed adapting. It's like an interesting creative challenge to sort of take something and put it into a different media and figure out what has to change, what you can keep and what should stay according to like the rules of the medium. And then I got to spend a couple of years sort of making up Conan stories purely out of my head, which was like a real blast. And then at the end, now I'm back to sort of adapting the story, which is interesting because that final act of the book has like essentially no speaking in it, which I didn't really realize what that was going to be like until I wrote it. I'm like, okay, now I have to like four issues to fill in the thoughts. Just sort of and there's not really. I mean, he's like alone for most of it too, so it's like he doesn't really have anybody to talk to. So that again, it's like an interesting creative puzzle to solve. So I enjoy it. Like I was able to sort of like do both things.
Yeah, the story I'm working from is kind of unique in the sense that it's really just a page-and-a-half outline, and you can finish 4 or 5 chapters of it. So I do have a lot of freedom there. I mean, and then the arc following mine is based on literally 2 paragraphs in the next story. Howard did this great thing where he would always open up in media res, where Conan was in some crazy situation, and then he'd give a little couple sentence, description of what army he was in or what, who he had just stolen from. But then we can take those very vague descriptions and get 6-issue arcs out of them. They're just as exciting and awesome as the stories of the Howard stories themselves.
Well, I guess that is pretty much it for the panel today. We got one more question. Yeah?
Will The Witcher be ongoing or limited?
Be a limited run right now, I believe.
Sorry, could you please repeat? I didn't hear.
If The Witcher was ongoing or limited?
It's going to be 5 issues now,
Yep.
and let's see what comes out of it.
Absolutely. I think I've read the first one. It's awesome. So definitely go out and check it out. sure. That's March.
I believe 19, I guess.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming out. Again, I want to thank Craig Van Lente, Brian Roy. These guys will all be signing as well at the same time, 4 o'clock later today. So definitely come by and check us out. We'll be up there. And yeah, thanks very much. Enjoy comic.
Yeah, guys that did the Witcher question, come on.